gift. But first of all, ask yourself, do I really need this? How important is this today, or in this circumstance, and you'd be surprised. But just take your interpersonal life relationships approaches, use some of the similar expectations you would have of your bank, your employer, your credit card company, and see if that doesn't actually bode well for a lot of the things that bring you pain and bring you angst and concern. Okay, let's see. I can't see it because I'm still on the freeway actually, Shawana, so I'll see maybe when I get to a light or something. But those are the things I like to emphasize and ask everybody to think on. These are the things that fill my brain when I'm quiet sometimes, it's that. So as a borrower, I like to emphasize things like this because I myself have had to borrow. I have student loans. I've borrowed there. I borrowed to help my brother even for school, but we were very sensible about borrowing, knew when to not borrow and make do. And if you've promised to repay, communicate, right? Communicate. If you owe a loan, you need to let the bank know when payment. You actually sign terms of agreement, loan service agreement, saying when you're going to repay. Well, the same thing goes if your family member lends you money. I'm a fan of Family Guy, the cartoon. And one of my favorite episodes is the episode where Brian, the dog, borrowed money from Stewie, the baby. And then Stewie sees Brian like living the good life, like he borrowed money from Brian borrowed money from Stewie, hasn't paid Stewie back, but here goes Brian living the good life. And so, for like crazy episodes you see in that one episode, of course, but crazy different events in the episode, Stewie's like, you got my money? You got my money, man? Hey, man, you got my money? And it's hilarious because at first, if you look at it, you're like, yeah, that reminds me of people who just, they lend you something and within 2 minutes they're asking for it back. Now, that also is because some people are so nice that they'll lend you things even when they don't really have the resources to spare. And so, of course, as soon as they lent it to you, now they need it back because it wasn't something they really had to spare. And that's also why being a borrower is awkward, because you might actually be putting somebody else out, but you come to them with a sob story, and because they're kind or because they know someone was kind to them in the past, they will lend it to you, even if in that moment they knew they didn't really have resources to spare, but perhaps you told them, I just need till the end of the week, and so they're like, okay, in a week I'll get it back, and then I can delay my thing for a week because I want this person who's having this dire emergency to be able to get through the week. And then of course, imagine how hard it is to see that person a week later. They haven't given you your loan back, but here they are gallivanting, just living the good life. And they may not even really be living the good life. For all you know, they've borrowed from you and everybody else to make that look, but to you it looks that way because they promised. And here you are cutting corners just to make sure that they had the opportunity to borrow from you. So keep that in mind. I always like to say, think about the other person as well. Put yourself in their shoes. And before you start running around being so angry that this person who had loaned you something is now telling everybody that they loaned you this thing and you haven't paid them back, ask yourself, did I communicate about it? Did I update them? Etc. Now, a word of advice to the lender too. If you've lent someone something out of the goodness of your heart, just because you've lent it to them doesn't mean you have to tell everybody you've lent it to them. But really, as the lender, you are in control of the situation. Like if I take a loan from a bank, I may not want them telling the world that I took a loan from them. But if their standard is to report it to the credit agencies that they loaned Cindy Duke money and this is how she's paying me back, I can't get angry. Like I can't send a threat by lawyer to the bank saying, hey, just because you lent me money, you don't get to tell people you lent me money. I think as a borrower, you need to make sure, if you're borrowing from somebody, is this something that's confidential? What are the terms of the borrowing, including disclosure? Again, just take that approach in your interpersonal life and relationships as you would with the bank, the credit card companies. Keep in mind, a lot of these big banks today started out as small family operations. They, in the 1800s, 1700s, early 1900s, they were also interpersonal relationships, but they learned to master it, they learned to expand it, they learned to franchise it and turn it into some sort of a corporation or global entity, right? But the truth is, they started these big companies on the same tenets, the same principles that we use in our day-to-day life, just on a smaller scale. So keep that in mind. And I think you'd be surprised at how much better you do with those relationships and how much better you do with your friends. So let's see what Shawana wrote. So Shawana says, yes, I ask why they need it too. She also says, yes, and I don't lend anything unless I'm okay with not getting it back. I agree with that. Like I said, my mom, that's her thing, I would say, for the last 5 years. We're immigrants to the US, and so as most immigrants, particularly when you come from a place where lots of resources are limited, we're used to the fact that people, family members, friends are in need. And one of the things we did, especially when we lived in New York City, in Brooklyn, was we packed a barrel. My mom, we kept barrels always in the ready, right? And then one day I said to her, so I was never a big fan of the barrels, and I felt like it increased entitlement and begging culture, because, I have one experience where my mom would just gift people a barrel. So she didn't wait for them to ask. She would just start shopping and fill a barrel and send it to them. And there's one famous experience. Actually, we have three, but one I'll share today, which is the person gets the barrel. We bought the barrel, packed the barrel, unbeknownst to them, everything, shipped it. And then when it arrived and they went to clear it at customs there in TNT, they were charged a certain price. And so it wasn't a lot. It was like the 300 TT dollars, so the equivalent of about 50 US. And they chose not to take it. They didn't take it. They left it there. And it wasn't until my mom had called, it'd been months, and she was like, they never told me what they thought of the things in the barrel. And she called the person, and the person said, oh yeah, I never picked that up. And my mom's like, why? And they were charging me money. I'm not paying for that. I told them they could keep it. They could keep that. Right? Now, that, of course, it wasn't a borrower-lender circumstance in the exact sense, because certainly they didn't ask for a barrel, but they always were calling and just talking about tough times. Always a gripe, always a sadness, always a rough life story. And so she's like, I'm going to do this for them. We're going to pack this. We're going to send it. And she packed everything. So that person just left that there and let it rot. And that's pretty telling. Anyway, I've got to get into work. Have a great day.